Nobody warned you about this. The moment you start thinking differently from everyone around you, something begins to shift. Not in the world, in you. And by the time you notice what has changed, it is already too late to pretend it did not happen. You are going to watch this video, and one of two things will occur. Either you will walk away with a psychological architecture that most human beings will never possess, or you will walk away with a weapon pointed directly at yourself, and you will not realize it until you have already pulled the trigger. That is not a threat. That is a map. And every single person who has ever touched real power, real precision, real psychological depth has stood exactly where you are standing right now, at the threshold between becoming something extraordinary and becoming something you were warned about in stories. The question this video answers is not whether you are smart enough to handle these ideas. The question is whether you are honest enough, because what Machiavelli actually understood, the thing that gets buried under centuries of misquoting and misrepresentation, is that the most dangerous battlefield in the world is not between nations. It is not between rivals. It is between the version of you that thinks clearly and the version of you that has convinced itself it already does. Are you ready? Because this only works if you are completely honest with what comes next. I am willing to see myself clearly, even when it costs me. The 5 thinking patterns that restructure a mind. Here is something you were never taught in school, never told by anyone who wanted you to succeed in a manageable and predictable way. Intelligence is not a possession. It is a practice. And most people who consider themselves intelligent are practicing something they have never consciously examined. They are running mental software that was installed by their environment, their parents, their failures, their social circles, and they have never once opened the code to read what it actually says. What follows are 5 thinking patterns that are not opinions. They are structural shifts in how a mind operates, and once you build them in, you cannot unbuild them. Inversion. The art of thinking backward. Every ambitious person you have ever met is asking the same question. How do I win? Machiavelli never started there. He started with a different question entirely. What destroys princes? What collapses kingdoms that appeared unshakable? What eliminates men who thought they were permanent? Because Machiavelli understood something that the goal-obsessed mind completely misses. Success is not primarily built. It is primarily defended. And what you fail to defend against will dismantle everything you build, regardless of how brilliantly you built it. Inversion thinking is the practice of asking the catastrophic question first. Before you build the strategy, ask what strategy has historically destroyed people in this exact position. Before you enter the relationship, ask what patterns consistently hollow relationships out from the inside. Before you make the investment, ask what invisible assumptions are buried in this decision. That, if wrong, transform opportunity into collapse. This is not pessimism. Pessimism is expecting failure and stopping. Inversion is expecting the threat, mapping it precisely, removing it methodically, and then moving forward with the terrain, actually cleared rather than imagined clear. Charlie Munger built one of history's most successful investment philosophies almost entirely around this principle. He did not primarily ask where the money was. He asked where the devastation came from, and he avoided that geography so completely that the money had nowhere else to go. Your first exercise with this pattern is uncomfortable. Think of the most important goal in your life right now, the one that carries the most emotional weight. Now spend 10 serious, unhurried minutes listing every single way that goal realistically collapses. Not the dramatic failures, the quiet ones, the slow ones, the ones that feel fine right up until they do not tam those threats. Remove what you can remove. Prepare for what you cannot. Then move. The mind that sees its own destruction clearly is the mind that avoids it. The mind that only sees its own victory is the mind that walks directly into the ambush it could not imagine. Metacognition. The mind watching itself. Two people are handed the same philosophical text. One reads every word carefully. One reads it faster with less apparent focus. 3 months later, the second person has restructured 3 major life decisions around the ideas in that text. The first person remembers it as a good book. This is not about intelligence. It is about metacognition, the practice of studying not just what you learn, but how you learn it. Most people treat their own mind as a black box. Information goes in, behavior comes out. The process in between is a mystery they have never investigated. But your mind has a specific profile. It absorbs information better at particular times of day. It retains concepts more effectively through specific methods, whether that is teaching others, writing by hand, applying immediately, or sleeping on it deliberately. It has specific conditions under which it genuinely changes its operating patterns versus conditions under which it feels like it is learning while actually just accumulating. Most people have never mapped any of this. They consume enormous quantities of information and then feel confused when their behavior, their decisions, their outcomes remain essentially unchanged. The content was not the problem. The processing was. Here is a question to sit with seriously. In the last 12 months, what specific idea genuinely changed how you make decisions? Not what you found interesting, not what you agreed with. What actually restructured your behavior? If the answer is vague, the problem is not that you are not consuming enough. The problem is that you do not yet understand how your own mind converts input into transformation. Studying the mechanism is the pattern. And once you understand your own mechanism, you stop competing with other people's volume. You start operating at a depth most people will never reach. Not because they lack access, but because they never investigated the tool they were using to access it. Socratic self-destruction. Attacking what you believe. Machiavelli wrote something that most people read as arrogance. He wrote it as a warning. He said that the man who does not think for himself will come to ruin, because the world will think for him, and the world is not interested in his survival. Here is the uncomfortable implication of that statement. Most people's beliefs are not conclusions. They are inheritances. They were absorbed from family, environment, social circles, formative experiences, and they have been defended ever since, rather than examined. A belief that has never survived genuine attack is not a conviction, it is a comfort. and comfort and truth are two entirely different things that occasionally share the same address. The Socratic practice is this: take something you believe strongly, something that feels foundational, something you would instinctively defend if challenged. Now construct the most rigorous, most intellectually honest, most uncomfortable argument against it. Not the lazy version, not the straw man, the argument that a genuinely intelligent person who had arrived at the opposite conclusion would actually make. Can you do it? If you cannot, that belief is not yours. You are its host, not its owner. The mind that can destroy its own beliefs is not an unstable mind. It is the most stable kind of mind that exists because its foundations have been tested. When someone challenges what this mind believes, the challenge does not destabilize it. It either strengthens the belief by failing to break it, or it reveals a flaw that needed to be found. Either outcome is a victory. Either outcome moves the person closer to what is actually true, rather than further into what feels safe to believe. Weak minds collect beliefs. Strong minds test them until only the ones that survive remain. Negative visualization. Living the worst before it arrives. The Stoic philosophers practiced something their contemporaries found morbid and their descendants found transformational. Before any significant decision, before any important relationship, before any high-stakes undertaking, they would sit in complete stillness and walk themselves through the worst realistic outcome in full psychological detail. Not the catastrophic fantasy version, the actual worst case. What precisely would be lost, how it would feel in the body, what the days after would look like, who would need to be told, how recovery would begin, and then they would live their actual lives. This practice does two things that nothing else replicates. The first is that setbacks stop being ambushes. You have already walked through that territory in your mind. When reality sends you there, you do not freeze in shock. You move. Because you have rehearsed this terrain. You know where the ground is. The second is subtler and more powerful. When you have genuinely sat with the worst case and not fled from it, the worst case loses much of its psychological grip on your decisions. You stop making choices to avoid what you fear. You start making choices about what you actually want, and those are entirely different decision-making processes with entirely different outcomes. Most people run the fantasy on loop. The perfect version of how things go, the speech they give when everything works, the expression on faces when the outcome is what they hoped. And then, when reality arrives with its complexity and its disappointment and its unexpected complications, they collapse not from weakness but from total psychological unpreparedness. Prepare for the worst. Pursue the best, in that sequence, not the reverse. Identity before behavior. Becoming rather than doing. Machiavelli observed something about power that remains true and remains largely unacknowledged. He said that it is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles. He meant that the position does not make the person. The person makes the position meaningful, and the person is made long before the position is held. Discipline is a resource. Identity is a structure. Resources deplete. Structures persist. The person who forces themselves to think carefully every day through willpower is fighting the same battle every single day. They will win some days and lose others, and the exhausting war never truly ends. The person who has built the identity of a careful thinker does not fight that battle in the same way. Not thinking carefully would feel like a violation of something fundamental. The resistance is different in kind, not just degree. Every time you challenge your own assumption before defending it, you cast a vote for the identity of an honest thinker. Every time you sit with the uncomfortable feedback rather than deflecting it, you build the structure of a person who grows from what they do not want to hear. Every time you choose precision over speed when the stakes are real, you become the person who is known for getting things right. The behavior comes first. The identity crystallizes behind it. And once the identity is solid, the behavior requires a fraction of the energy it used to cost. Stop trying to do what geniuses do. Start building the identity of someone who thinks like one. The actions will follow without the daily war. I am who I build. Stay with me. Because what you just absorbed is the foundation. But a foundation without the warning buried underneath it is not wisdom. It is a building permit for something that will eventually fall. The next chapter is the part that most people teaching these ideas deliberately skip because it makes them uncomfortable and because it makes you uncomfortable. It is the chapter about what sharp thinking actually does to a person over time when nobody is watching the process. I have seen what happens, and I need you to see it too, before it is a story you are telling about yourself. What sharp thinking does to you in the dark. This is not a warning that applies to other people. This is a warning that applies specifically to the kind of person who watches videos like this one to the end. Because the people who are at risk are not the indifferent ones. They are the serious ones. The ones who genuinely develop these patterns. The ones who get sharper and faster and more precise and do not notice what is quietly leaving them on the way up. The distance that feels like discernment. It begins with a legitimate observation. You start noticing things in conversations that you could not see before. The unexamined assumption behind someone's confident claim, the logical leap they made without realizing they made it. The pattern in their reasoning that they cannot see from inside it. And at first, you engage. You offer the observation carefully. You frame it as a question rather than a correction. You try to be useful, but it does not always land. And sometimes it lands badly, and gradually, without any single conscious decision, you stop trying. You learn that the effort of bridging the gap between how you see something and how most people around you see it is frequently not worth the social cost it extracts. So you pull back, you become selective, and then more selective. And then the selectivity becomes a default rather than a choice. And one day you realize you have not had a genuine intellectual exchange with anyone in your immediate life in months. And you have named this something respectable. You have called it standards. You have called it efficiency. You have called it not wasting energy. Machiavelli called something like this a failure of leadership, a prince who cannot bring people forward from where they are is not leading. He is simply standing somewhere ahead of them, alone, calling it vision. Real influence requires patience. Not the patience of waiting for people to catch up, but the patience of understanding that other minds move differently, process differently, arrive at places through different routes, and that your ability to see something clearly does not obligate everyone else to see it on your timeline. The arrogance of impatience destroys more potential influence than almost any other single factor, and it disguises itself as competence, which makes it exceptionally difficult to catch. The contempt that replaces empathy. There is a specific moment in the development of a sharp mind that nobody talks about directly. It is the moment you stop remembering what it felt like before you could see what you now see. You forget the confusion. You forget the years of not being able to identify what you can now identify in seconds. You forget that the clarity you carry did not arrive complete. It was built, painfully, over time, through failure and frustration, and the specific grace of someone or something that met you where you were, rather than where they were. And once you forget that, you start expecting others to already be where you now are. And when they are not, when they make the mistakes you used to make, when they cannot see what now feels obvious, something appears in you that is colder than frustration. Contempt. Contempt is the specific psychological shift where another person stops being someone you are trying to understand and becomes someone you have finished understanding. They are a type now, a category, a predictable instance of a pattern you have already mapped. And a mind operating from contempt cannot lead. It cannot connect. It cannot build anything that requires other human beings to contribute their full complexity, because it has already decided that their complexity is not interesting enough to engage with seriously. You can analyze people from contempt. You cannot understand them. And a mind that loses the ability to genuinely understand people, not observe them, not categorize them, but actually inhabit their perspective with real curiosity, that mind will make catastrophic errors in judgment while believing its judgment is sound. The loneliness that learned to justify itself. Nobody announces the isolation. It has no ceremony. It simply deepens. The gap between how you process the world and how most people around you process it widens slowly and then quickly. And you accommodate this by adjusting your expectations downward. You stop looking for depth in certain conversations. You stop expecting certain people to follow certain arguments. You make your peace with the limitation, and then you mistake that peace for wisdom. But there is something underneath it that is not wisdom. It is the specific ache of a mind that has become unreachable, not from the outside because it is too complex, but from the inside because it has stopped making itself available. The most genuinely powerful minds in recorded history shared one characteristic across wildly different fields and eras. They maintained deep, demanding, irreplaceable connections with other human beings. Not in spite of their intellectual sharpness, because of their understanding that sharpness without connection is a blade with no handle. Eventually, it cuts the person holding it. Lincoln kept advisors in the room who disagreed with him on everything specifically because he understood what an unchallenged mind costs. Da Vinci moved through the world with insatiable curiosity about every kind of person he encountered. He was not selective about who was worth his attention. He was selective about what he paid attention to within every encounter. If you are finding that your world is getting smaller, as you get smarter, that is not a sign of rising standards. That is a warning signal. And the earlier you read it correctly, the less it will cost you. The feedback that stopped arriving. This is the most dangerous of the erosions, and it is the most dangerous precisely because it does not feel like erosion. It feels like arrival. When you develop genuine skill and demonstrate it consistently, people around you shift. They stop correcting you. They stop pushing back with real force. They let things pass that they would challenge in someone whose competence they were less certain of. And your brain reads the silence as confirmation. The lack of challenge feels like proof. The absence of correction feels like accuracy. But here is what is actually happening. They stopped because you became intimidating, not because you stopped making mistakes. Because they stopped believing their feedback would be received as anything other than misunderstanding. Because the last several times they offered resistance, you had a response for everything. And eventually, offering resistance started feeling futile. The silence is not respect, it is avoidance. And it is the most comfortable prison a sharp mind can inhabit, because from the inside it looks exactly like success. Machiavelli understood this at a structural level. He wrote that a prince who is not wise himself cannot be well advised, because advisors who sense that wisdom is not present will tell him what he wants to hear rather than what he needs to know. The moment the honest feedback stops reaching you is the moment your thinking begins to deteriorate. Not the moment it becomes wrong. The moment the mechanism that catches wrongness gets switched off and the decline is quiet. By the time you notice the damage, you are looking at months or years of uncorrected errors compounded into something much larger than any single mistake. Do not go anywhere, because what you have just seen is the map of how a powerful mind dismantles itself from the inside. And I have not yet told you the most important part. I have not told you what stops it. And what stops it is not what you think it is. It is not more discipline. It is not more thinking. It is something that most people in the self-development space actively discourage because it sounds weak, and it is actually the hardest thing on this entire list. Stay with me for the final chapter. This is where the genius and the monster actually separate. The architecture that keeps you human while you become powerful. Let me say this, without softening it. Everything in this chapter requires you to work against the part of your mind that your developing competence has been building. The part that believes its own analysis, the part that trusts its own precision, the part that reads its own silence as proof. That part is useful. That part is also the part that will destroy you if you never question it. What follows is not soft. It is structurally difficult in a specific way. Understanding it takes seconds. Executing it consistently requires a kind of ongoing honesty with yourself that most sharp minds are not willing to sustain. Hunting for the truth you do not want. Honest feedback does not appear on its own when you have established yourself as competent. You must actively create the conditions for it and then protect those conditions vigilantly, because every natural social dynamic will work to remove them. The question is not, "What do you think?" That question generates polished, diplomatic responses that are designed to maintain the relationship rather than improve your thinking. The question is, what is the largest mistake I am currently making that I cannot see from inside it? And then the part that is harder than asking the question. You do not defend the answer. You do not explain why the person has misunderstood your approach. You do not reframe their concern as a smaller issue than they are presenting it as. You sit with it. You actually let it land. And you ask what it would mean if they were completely right. Beyond the question is the environment. You need to actively identify who in your life currently tells you what you do not want to hear, and you need to protect that person's willingness to continue doing so as if your thinking depends on it. Because it does. And if you look around and discover that no one is currently telling you anything that genuinely challenges you, that is not a sign that you have figured things out. It is a sign that the environment you have created has made honesty feel unsafe or futile. That is the emergency. Not the absence of challenge, the condition that made challenge disappear. The reality test that has no substitute. A mind that operates primarily in its own models eventually begins to trust the model more than the evidence. You build sophisticated frameworks for how things work. People, systems, decisions, consequences, and the frameworks are genuinely good. They have been tested and refined, and they predict accurately much of the time. And then the moment arrives when the framework and the evidence point in different directions. This is the moment that separates genuinely sharp minds from minds that have confused sophistication with accuracy. The genuinely sharp mind says, "The evidence is what is real. My framework is a tool for processing the evidence. When they conflict, I trust the evidence and update the framework. Always. Without exception." The mind that has confused sophistication with accuracy says, "I understand this situation better than the evidence suggests. The evidence is incomplete or being misread. The framework holds." History's most consequential errors have been made by brilliant people choosing the second response. Machiavelli himself wrote something that every strategic mind should have somewhere they see it every day. He wrote that the world belongs to those who can adapt to it, not to those who insist the world adapt to their understanding of it. Stay in the game. Build things. Test things. Let reality have the final word, not because you distrust your thinking, but because you trust it enough to know it needs to be tested to stay sharp. I stay grounded, always. The code you write. Before the pressure arrives, power does not reveal character. It amplifies whatever was already there before the power arrived. If you build psychological sharpness and influence without first establishing, in clear, specific, tested terms, what you will not do and what you will sacrifice rather than compromise, the power will amplify the parts of you that you have not yet examined. Not dramatically, through a sequence of small decisions that each seem reasonable in context, each of which moves the boundary slightly, each of which is justified in the moment by the specific pressures of the moment, until one day you look at the cumulative distance between where the boundary started and where it currently sits, and you do not recognize the territory. The personal code is written in advance of the test, not during it. What will you not do, regardless of what it costs you? How will you treat people who can give you nothing? What does your behavior look like in private when no one is constructing an impression of you? What do you owe to people who trusted you in a way that cannot be measured or repaid? These are not abstract moral questions. They are the most practical questions available, because they determine who you are when everything is on the line and your ego is actively involved in the decision. Without a code established in advance, intelligence becomes a sophisticated argument generator for whatever the ego wants in the moment. With a code, intelligence becomes something you can actually trust, because it is operating within a structure that has already accounted for the pressure it will face. The strongest version of yourself is not the most capable version. It is the most capable version that still knows what it stands for. Seeing clearly and choosing not to use it. When you genuinely develop the ability to understand people, not just observe their behavior patterns, but actually understand what drives them, what they fear, what they want underneath what they say they want, you gain access to something that works in two entirely different directions. You can use that understanding to connect more honestly, to lead more effectively, to meet people where they actually are, rather than where it is convenient for you to meet them, to build something with other people that none of you could build alone. Or you can use that same understanding to find the precise point of leverage in each person and press it in service of your own agenda. Both are available to you. The understanding does not choose. Here is what the manipulation path actually delivers over time. It works. It works efficiently, repeatedly, and without apparent consequence, right up until it does not. Because manipulation requires maintaining a gap between what is real and what you have sold someone. And maintaining that gap costs energy that compounds. And people feel the gap before they can name it. Trust hollows out. Relationships become performances. And you end up alone, technically capable, with no one around you who knows who you actually are. Real power does not need manipulation. Real power builds environments where people want to do what serves everyone. Real power understands people well enough to lead them without deceiving them. That is harder. It takes longer, but it is the only kind of power that actually compounds over time. Machiavelli used the fox and the lion as his framework for this. The fox sees the trap. The lion cannot be threatened. But he was describing a complete picture of power, not a permission structure. The fox who sees the trap and avoids it is genuinely powerful. The fox who sees the trap understands it completely and then uses that knowledge to lure other people into it, has not become more powerful. They have become more dangerous in a direction they cannot control. See everything. Understand everything. Use that understanding to build, not to break. That is the line. That is the actual line between the genius and the monster that this video's title promised you. My power is my restraint. You are close to the end. But before I give you the closing of this video, I need to show you something that most people never see about themselves. Because they are too close to the picture, I am going to describe two people. One of them is going to be uncomfortably familiar, and the one that feels more familiar is the most important information you will take from this entire video. Stay with me for the final 60 seconds of this. 2 people finished watching this video. The first one sat with it. They identified the pattern in themselves that they have been calling something respectable for a long time. They realized the isolation they called standards is something colder. They realized the silence around them that they called success is actually avoidance. They found one person they can ask the uncomfortable question to this week. They wrote down 2 lines of their personal code. They decided they will test their next confident belief against the strongest possible argument against it before they act on it. They did not become humble. They became precise. They kept the sharpness. They added the honesty. And they became something genuinely rare in the world. A mind that is powerful and a person that is trustworthy at the same time. The second person got sharper watching this. They catalogued the 5 thinking patterns and confirmed that they already use most of them. They agreed with the warning section about other people they know. They noticed that the erosions described are things they see in people around them. They absorbed the chapter on keeping yourself human as theory they do not currently need to apply. They left the video smarter about ideas and unchanged in terms of who they are. Same video, same knowledge, completely different relationship to it. The difference is one question. Which of the 2 people in those descriptions felt more uncomfortable to read? If the second one was more familiar, you have just received the most valuable feedback this video can offer you. Do not waste it. You watched this entire video to the end. That is not a neutral act. That tells you something about the kind of mind you have and the kind of person you are capable of being. Now make the choice that a person like that would actually make. I grow, I stay sharp, I stay human, in that order every time.